Hello and welcome to another weekly update. I hope you're doing well. I hope you've had a good week last week. A busy week last week, wasn't it? I think this week's going to be pretty busy as well. We'll see. See how it goes. But yeah, lots and lots of things going on and should be really interesting. There's a few things to talk about this week. Some big announcements. And then starting towards the end of what we're going to talk about today, starting to think about some upcoming speaking events as well, which is very exciting. The conference season is now kicking off. So yeah, let's get into it. First thing to talk about then, the Microsoft Graph .NET SDK. This is a biggie. So there's a new version out of the Microsoft Graph .NET SDK. So what is this? This is what developers use if they're smart and they're already writing C# code. They're already using .NET, but they're accessing the graph. There's a few different ways, obviously, to access the graph. It is just a REST API, so you could just make REST calls all day long, and that's fine. But if you do access the graph a lot, it is worth looking into the SDK that's for it, because it wraps it makes a lot of stuff easier, and it abstracts quite a lot of stuff, and it abstracts away some of the hassle around making requests and responses. And over time, that team have just worked to remove some of the rough edges and the friction points and just make it easier to work with Microsoft Graph. And that's great. And there's a new version of that out now, V5. And it's got a couple of cool things in it I want to show you. This first one is definitely, I'm going to describe it. And if you haven't been here, then it might not feel like so much of a big deal, but if you have, it absolutely will. And that's the ability to combine V1 and beta APIs together in the same code base. Now, could you do this before? Yes, absolutely. Of course you could. You could just change the URL endpoint from 1 to beta, but then that's going to impact all of your code. And all of your code is now running on the beta endpoint, which isn't terrible if you're making the calls you're making are identical to the V1 ones. You probably won't notice any behavior, but you don't know that. The bigger risk is that if you've got some production code that it was against the V1, let's say, because it's a GA product, it needs support and all the rest of it, and you want to try something out for one area of your applications, a feature or something like that, and you want to use the beta endpoints for that. So you go to the beta endpoint, and now everything's on beta, but there's kind of no difference in functionality, and that's fine. But over time, what you might find is that some other feature back in your main bit of your application starts to take advantage of a beta functionality that you didn't really realize was beta because you're on the beta endpoint now, and it just sort of showed up in IntelliSense and you started using it. So now you've got beta dependencies across your code that you weren't aware of. This is a much nicer way of doing it. It splits out the V1 and the beta into different clients and then allows you to use those different clients separately. I like it. I think it's cool. It's a good idea. It's a good way of doing it. And so this is just one of the updates as part of this V5. So if you already use the .NET SDK, it's kind of a no-brainer to go and get this because you'll get a bunch of bug fixes. You'll get a bunch of nicer kind of simplistic ways to do things. You don't need to put request in anymore. I think I saw that down here somewhere. Yep. You don't need to have that .request in there anymore, which is quite nice. You can now write something cool and clear and obvious like client.users.post. That's really nice. So there's a lot of like little improvements like that. And they kind of add up and go a long way. So I think this is really nice. And if you haven't seen this before, if everything I'm talking to you about is new and you're thinking, oh, I access Graph quite a lot. Wouldn't it be nice to have a nice .NET SDK with IntelliSense? You should go and check this out because it is really good. All right, let's talk about Azure Communication Services next. Lots and lots of things in the Azure Communication Services world that are happening. And there's a big update blog post out, and there's a couple of other ones as well. So let's talk about the big blog post update, which is the February 2023 feature update. It's talks about a couple of different things. The biggest one, I think, probably that people are going to notice is background blur for Azure Communication Services. So you can now do background blur just like you can in Microsoft Teams. Up until now, if you've been using Azure Communication Services, those clients have not been able to do background blur, even though you've been able to join a Teams meeting. And if in the Teams meeting, the Teams person did background blur, the ACS user would still see that background blur. What I mean is the ACS user was not able to do their own background blur. And thanks to this update, they now can. So that's now something that's supported, as well as specifying your own background for the video. So you can put your own logo on, you can put your own nice video background. It seems really nice. In fact, it's very similar to what you can do in Teams, but you need Teams Premium for. So you can now do it in ACS, but you don't need an ACS Premium. So that's a good win. So if you've got Azure Communication Services on the client, you can do background blur. You can also do background video replacement straight into that calling experience, which is really nice. You can roll it out into meetings. You can do it one-to-one. It's really, really nice. You can do it for virtual appointments as well. So lots and lots of application there. There's a bunch of other things as well on this blog post. So I just think go and have a look at the blog post. I'll put a link to it obviously in the notes. But this is the first thing I wanted to call out with this was this background blur stuff. Like I say, there are other things as well. But that's the main one for me. Like that's a biggie. Secondary to this, or like as well as this, I suppose, is this blog post, which also came out this week, which is a big update on calling features. So not only is there like a big monthly update about new features, including the background blur stuff, there's also a bunch of specific calling features. And a biggie here is raw media access for video. So this is now in public preview. Prior to this, there was raw media access for audio only, but now it's here for video. And this allows developers to get access to literally the raw media. That's the point. That's the title, right? Why would they want to do this? Well, if you want to do real-time analysis of the video, so if you want to detect objects in the video, you can now do that with this because this gives you access to the raw feed, the frames of the video feed. So you can go and take those frames, you can put them through some cognitive services workload, and you can figure out what's going on in these frames. Is that useful to you? I don't know. I don't know your the code you're writing. I don't know the domain you're operating in. It has been useful for audio to do things like sentiment analysis. Could you do that for video? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know enough about the cognitive services workloads. I feel like that would be an interesting thing to figure out how many people are there and what the general sentiment is. But also there will be big applications for things like identifying objects around, in construction and safety and all these other things. So retail. Here's a great retail example. You could be doing a customer services call, customer services video call, and the customer says, I've got this washing machine, but I've no idea what model it is. I've no idea what type it is. Okay, fine. Put on your video. Show me your video. Let's go and see what it is, right? That would be interesting, wouldn't it? And then have the cognitive services thing figure out, it's that model. I can tell because I know lots. I've got an AI model that's built around different models of whatever this is. Lots of applications for stuff like that. So this is really interesting. Go and check out if you're into ACS and you really wanted the raw media for videos, because now you can get it. So that's really interesting. Cool. Lots of fun things this week, actually. Lots of opening up of opportunities, lots of fun projects to come and get talked about in 2023. I wonder should I do a talk involving raw media for video? That would be quite fun, wouldn't it? I could maybe do a demo that did that thing I just described about identifying things in the room. I might look into that. It feels like it's going to be a little heavy on workload, so I might need a beefy laptop to carry around to deliver the presentation, but maybe I could use the cloud as well. I don't know. I might look into that. That'd be an interesting, fun project, wouldn't it? Okay, let's talk about something else. Talking about fun projects. The Azure Communication Services team talked last week. I talked about this, about a sample application that they wrote up around a meetings app between Azure Communication Services and Microsoft Teams. It was in 2 parts, and now the second part is out. So that's interesting. You can go and look at the second part of this, which really talks about creating that Teams meeting that you're then going to join using the Azure Communication Services client and creating it using Microsoft Graph API and Azure Functions. And that's kind of basically what this blog post is and what this code is. Goes through creating a meeting and then so that your Azure Communication Services instance that you created in part 1 can now use it. This is a really nice segue, actually. So, sorry, first of all, let's wrap this up. This is a great, this is good that this is here. The part 1 was good as well, and obviously it's good to have the part 2 to the part 1. This is a nice little how-to. It's a nice little project if you get into Azure Communication Services, because it gives you something straight away that you can build and you can use and you can see, which is interesting, which is good. But it's a good segue into something else I'm going to talk about. I'm trying to be a good live streaming person. Is that a thing? Because I'm supposed to also look at the comments that come in, and that's supposed to be a thing you're supposed to do. I don't know how people do it. I don't know how people live stream about what they're talking about, but the content is, and also keep an eye on the comments. There's just not enough screens, so I'm looking all over the place. But hello, Gary. Good morning. Great to see you. Hello, Kevin. I am far too awake for this time of the morning. I have been to the gym, so I am super on it. I woke up early. Oh, it might have something to do with the fact that our daughter stayed over at her grandmother's last night, so we had a really good night's sleep. And then I went to the gym, and I'm still only halfway through my first coffee. But I'm on the dopamine, is it? Is that a thing? I think so. Yes. And then, yeah, Kevin talking about the ACS stuff. Yes, really interesting opportunity for frontline workers. Frontline workers are a really interesting use case, especially around ACS, because they don't necessarily all have Teams licenses, but with ACS they don't need to. But they all have a variety of different devices as well. So having something like ACS that just works in a browser, really, really interesting. So, yes, Gary is also talking about the weekly series covering ACS on the community call. I think that maybe that message is slightly delayed with what I then talked about, because this is their part 2. But yes, a +1 from Gary for the stuff we just talked about around building that meetings app. With ACS and Microsoft Teams. Now, talking about ACS and Microsoft Teams, this is an excellent segue to talk about speaking this year. So conference speaking. So I am going to be kicking off the season by talking in the Microsoft Reactor London, which is interesting. I really like Microsoft Reactor London. I've not been there for a while. The last time I was there, I think, was 2019. And that was kind of a special one for me, that 2019 one, because they do a cool thing in the Reactor in London, which is where I'm going to be talking, where they already have like recording equipment set up, like installed permanently in the building, so they can record. Well, this is true in 2019. I don't know if it's true anymore. Back in 2019, you would be able to get a recording of your session, because they would just stream it and record it, and it would go straight out to YouTube. And it was all kind of built in. The angles were great. The sound was great. They had it was a good mix of like what was on your screen and you. It was done really well. So I walked away from my first kind of talk at Reactor with this great video, nicely produced video of my talk. A few months later, all of the audition, like the submissions to speak, came in for Microsoft Ignite 2019. And for the first time ever, they had this requirement that you submit like some evidence of you having spoken somewhere. And I had this great ready to go package video just to like drop in and give them, which was really, really cool. And as a result of doing some of that, and a result of that submission process, I became a community reporter for Ignite 2019, which was tons of fun. And I'm so glad I had that opportunity, especially now looking back, how everything has kind of shooken out over the last 3 years. I'm very pleased to have had that opportunity. So anyway, where did I go with that? Oh yes, I'm going to be speaking at the Reactor again for the Microsoft 365 UK user group in London. This is going to be a good one. It's not just me. There's also Lee Ford and Leon Armstrong, who are both talking, both MVPs, both excellent. Together we are talking, so they're both talking about AI in different places. I'm going to be talking about actually Azure Communication Services and Microsoft Teams, doing a fairly similar talk actually to the mini-series. But instead of sensibly writing a mini-series into 2 nice blog posts and making an article out of it, I'm attempting to do it in 40 minutes live, which should be fun. So I'm going to start with nothing and build the whole thing out in roughly the same way that they have, but we've done it slightly different ways, which is fine. So it'll be a different thing, but the end result will be more or less the same. You'll have a Teams meeting that people can join via Microsoft Teams, and then an Azure Communication Services meeting that people can join via Azure Communication Services. And if I'm feeling brave, what I tend to like to do is share a short link for the Azure Communication Services one and get everyone in the room to join on ACS and see how many people we can get into this Teams meeting on ACS and see if we can break it. And that's normally lots of fun. That's what I'm doing. It's going to be on the 16th of March in London. If you're around, please try and make it. It's in the evening time, so it's kind of a good after work sort of thing. I think there's drinks maybe and all that sort of stuff. So it's free to go, but there's tickets are limited because of space, so do make sure you register if that sounds interesting. Whew. All right, I'm going to go and lie down. That was a busy one. I think that's everything for me this week. I think this week is going to be hopefully not too busy, but we'll see. Lots of exciting things going on behind the scenes. Yeah, okay, it's going to be good. I think spring is starting, conference season is starting soon. That's it, all exciting. I love all that stuff. Yeah, should be good. Whatever it is you're doing, have a great week, and I will speak to you again next time.